Hey guys, it's Jace of the Forestry Project. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to use maps and aerial imagery, topography, stuff like that to better understand our property today. If you're new to the channel, thank you for coming by. I'd encourage you to subscribe. Also, check out our podcast and our social media platforms where we're putting out content. If you're coming back, thank you for your support. So a little bit about what we want to talk about today. If you go back to the last video that we put out on actually getting out on your property and walking around, we want to be able to take what we looked at and what we were able to reference out there and put it on a map so that we are eventually able to get a map where we break down different stands, which is just like little portions of the property that we're gonna either have the same species on or manage the same way, but we want to be able to understand that in a broad sense, just looking at images of the property, what's out there, and then looking at the topography of the land, what's the land like without the species and everything else. Because a lot of times what you'll find out is the species that's currently out there may not have always been there historically. So just going out to the property and looking doesn't always tell us what we need to know about what used to be out there. As you saw in the last video, there's a lot of good telltale signs as far as what used to be out there past management, but it's also good to go in and actually look at images, maps, and stuff. So let's get into it. I am using Onyx maps for my satellite imaging and part of my topography. I like Onyx. You're able to mark it up really well, use it on your phone, use it on your computer. Another really good platform to use is Google Earth as far as looking at satellite imagery. Google Earth does one thing a little bit better, in my opinion. They take a lot of their pictures or satellite images during the winter time. So you're able to see, where your hardwoods is, where your ponds are, basically looking at if it's green, it's probably pine, at least in the southeast where most of our evergreens are pine. And if you can see, limbs and everything and it looks kind of bare, you know that would be some type of hardwood, since hardwoods lose their leaves during the wintertime. So let's look at this satellite imagery real quick, and we can see, here's the pond where we started our video off last week, and you can see what I'm talking about, that I know this was taken during the summer. One, all the trees are green, and two, the lily pads are out. But this gives you an idea of the lily pad issue that we have going on. You can also see the mobile home that I referenced. It is no longer there. It got moved quite a few years ago, actually. I was trying to remember the other day exactly when it got moved. I'd say 4 to 5 years ago, at least, if not a little bit longer than that. But that's one thing about it that we want to look at, is just because you see it on the satellite imagery doesn't mean it is just 100% that is what's out there. Actually get out on your land and look around as well. This is the road that we came in on, and then this is the pond stand out behind that we walked around. If you remember from the last video, the turkeys that we heard was over in this ravine area, and then walking around, this was the hardwood ravine that we walked down in. This was the little pond Pocosin area thing, and then this was the upland ponds with a little bit more hardwood species in them. But if you just look at this satellite image, it can be a little bit difficult to, where's the elevation at? Where is our species difference at? And that's where I like to go to topographic maps. So topographic maps are essentially, it's just a plain map with lines in it, and those lines represent different elevations. So if you're using Onyx maps, you can click down here, and let's just go to topography for a second by itself. And this will give you, this is what I'm talking about with the lines. Now let's look, so we have a reference line. We know this is 600 feet of elevation. Now, typically they'll have one OnX does one every 100 feet, so you'll have 600, 700, 500, and there are 20-foot differences in between each of these lines. So we know that this one's going to be 20-foot difference, this one's going to be 20-foot difference. However, how do you determine which is going up and which is going down? Now, one of the easy ways I know to do it is to look at your water source. So if there's a body of water, typically it will be downhill. However, we need to take a broader look at this. We have a much bigger water source here. So let's pay attention to this creek right here. You can see a little blue line going up. And your creek is going to flow in a valley. It's not going to flow on top of a ridge. So we know this elevation has to be going down compared to this elevation. So let's do the same thing here. We're going up. So we know this is going to be higher elevation than this. So we're now able to get, this is the ravine where the turkeys were. This is the hardwood ravine that I took y'all down in. This is the Picosin area. There's no pond over here. And that can be one thing that it's best to look at both maps so that you can see everything that's out there, because you wouldn't want to miss that there's a pond there. So let's go, I really like OnX's hybrid version, and it kind of shows the satellite image is overlaid with a topographic map, or at least the topographic lines, so that you're able to see, where everything is in reference to elevation, slope, all that kind of stuff. So you can see that here, where kind of those hardwoods would be, is going to be your lower, or your slopes, based off of our topography. And the steeper the slope, the closer these lines are together. And then where it kind of broadens out is more of the flat area. So understanding the topographic maps may make you think that maybe the hardwood goes down in the ravines because of lower elevation or whatnot, and maybe the ponds are, higher elevation, drier sites typically, so they'll be up there. However, sometimes it's best to think about stuff from the past use. So if you remember on the video from last week, we talked about, you could see terrace rows out there, meaning it had been farmed. So another really good resource is to look at historical aerial photographs. So you can find it by going to, if you're in Alabama, just do Alabama historic imagery. And it should pop up, yeah. So go to the aerial photographs of Alabama, photography of Alabama, and select your county. So I know my land is in Walker County. Now, one thing to note is you need to understand or be able to reference where your location is. So if we're not going to do that, what I typically like to do is just go to the countywide and go to the latest year. Look around these and try to pinpoint your property, and that's why I say go to the latest year, because typically that is mostly the closest to what you remember. So I know just by looking at the lake that our land is right in here somewhere. And I'm assuming, that creek going up is going to be that right there. And our land sits somewhere right in this kind of little square there. Now, if you pay attention, this right here kind of looks like where the topography starts changing. And on all of this looks like where it was farmed. So maybe if we go back to our topographic map, this area that grew mostly in ponds is what was farmed, and the ravines where they couldn't farm grew up in hardwoods. So now we're able to understand a little bit better about, why certain things are the way they are now. However, Let's also look at how topography affects the species composition. And a good place to do that is go to Web Soil Survey. This is hosted by the NRCS. And you just go to Web Soil Survey, click on this link. Once you get here, you'll go to Start WSS. If you remember from the historic aerial photograph, you can see this is kind of the peak right up here. Here's the lake. So I know my land is right in here, so I'm just going to kind of go in. I'm going to zoom down to our property. There's the pond. So we're able to identify where it is. Let's move and kind of get this centered up in the screen. And then I want you to go over here at AOI, Area of Interest. And for this property, it's best to do a rectangle. For some instances, you may want to just kind of define it using a polygon, but I know our land is mostly square, so we can just use a rectangle. And when you select your area, go a little bit outside of your land. You don't just want to look at your land, but select that, and that way you're able to pull soil data from it. So now you see the hatched lines. You can go up here to Soil Map. You'll let it load. Okay, and now you can see this soil map bears an uncanny resemblance to our topographic map here. So you can see the bottom kind of changes. You have that ravine, you have this area here, and you have this area here. And if you go to soil map, you have this. This kind of goes into the topography. This goes in the topography. And then you have your downhill slope here and your ravine here. So we're able to see that topography has now affected your soil. But how do you understand all of this? So if you go over to here, it's going to tell you NSC, and we can see here NSC, so we know this soil type is right here. Well, let's look at your soil for a minute. So look down. What I typically pay attention to is your typical profile. So we know the first 4 inches of the soil should be a sandy loam. And then we know down to 25 inches should be a clay loam. What is a sandy loam? What is a clay loam? Let's actually look into that. So if you look up a soil profile triangle, and any of these will work just fine, we can see that up here is clay, down here is sand, and over here is silt. That's your 3 basic soil types, and you can have mixtures of each of those in between. Now, your particle size, how big each particle is, tends to increase as you move toward the sand from the clay and from the silt. How does that affect what goes on with the soil? Mostly that is drainage. So if you think about it, if you had a cup of water here, and say I had another cup, and it was filled with sand, if I poured the water through the sand, it is going to flow out a lot faster than if I had the cup with clay and I poured water on top of that. It's going to take a long time for that water to permeate through the clay and reach the bottom. So if you have a land with a soil that is more sand than clay, it's going to drain faster than if it's more clay than sand, and the same with silt. So if we look, we know now this is a sandy loam. You go back over to the soil profile. Sandy loam is fairly decent drainage. It's fairly close to the sand. Now, if we go to the SHE, which we know is this area, is also this area, Sipsey Bankhead Complex. What does this look like? Now it's loamy sand, and then sandy loam, and then sandy loam again. So we know for the first foot it's going to be either loamy sand or sandy loam. Going back to the soil triangle, sandy loam, loamy sand. So everything has really good drainage on this side. So now we're able to see, though, that topography is not only affecting your soil type that's out there, it's not only affecting, what species are able to grow, but your topography also affected the historic land use that also affects what's currently out there. So understanding this soil map, understanding the topography, and then looking back at those aerial images gets you a really good idea of what the land is, what it used to be, and why the species that are out there are. It also helps you to determine, looking at your soil types, looking at your slopes, we know this is less sloped than this. And you can see that, 6 to 12% slopes versus 15 to 45% slopes. So we can then start looking at, okay, what species grow in a moderately well-drained upland site, and then what species grow well in a fairly moderately well-drained kind of slope site. I hesitate to call it a true bottomland, but what species would grow best up here? Now, then you start looking at, and we'll get into this later, but it is a very good resource to have, is looking at the Silvics manual. And all of this will be linked in the video blog that goes out on the website. But the U.S. Forest Service put out the Silvics manual, and it tells you, you have a hardwood volume, you have a conifer volume. So conifers are going to be your pines. And you can get a table of contents, so you're able to then look at, this gives you the common name, this is your scientific name, and you can start looking at what species may grow well on those sites to then start determining what to plant out there. So I know this is, a rather unusual video. I enjoy being out in the woods, but I think it is very important to understand and realize just how much, no matter what we want to see on the land, understanding the topography, looking at what used to be out there through, historic aerial imagery, using more current satellite imagery to understand better what's currently out there and what it looks like, then helps you to determine, along with walking around your land, what is going on out there, what went on out there, and then lets you start being able to kind of understand how to manage it better. If you want to get into how to manage stuff better and starting to understand kind of the ecology of the site and how everything interacts, I encourage you to listen to our latest podcast that will be coming out Monday, February the 20th, I believe. Yes, Monday, February the 20th. And that will be with a very special guest of the podcast. We have Dr. Cush, who has been my professor at Auburn for the entire time that I've been here for both my bachelor's and my master's degree. I've had several classes with him. A great resource, very knowledgeable. And in that episode, we kind of go into forest ecology, what is natural on the landscape, a little bit of how to determine that. He mentions the Web Soil Survey. He also mentions the Silvics manual, and starting to actually go out there and look at what's on the property. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to go subscribe to our podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify right now, but I'm hoping to get it onto Google Podcast and a few other platforms here in the near future, and eventually plan on getting it to a audio and visual and rolling it out on YouTube as well. But in the meantime, go ahead and go check it out. You can also find it on our website, www.forestryImagined.com, and there you also find access to our blogs and links to all of our social media platforms, YouTube channel, and the likes. So with that, guys, I also want to say thank you for all the support that I have received, either watching the video, watching the podcast, interacting on social media, or reaching out to me personally. It means a lot. I'm very excited to be doing this. This has became a true passion of mine, being able to create the videos, the podcast, getting to talk to people, and getting to share some of what I've learned with everyone else. So with that, thank you again for all your support, and I look forward to the podcast coming out Monday and the video coming out next week, where we actually look at the topographic maps, look at the aerial images out on the land, and start breaking the land down into separate tracts so that we can start managing it. With that, thank you very much for watching. Happy management, and God bless.